Media recognition from Bloomberg, Reuters, recycling trade publications. Patented process for 100% recovery of critical metals, including cobalt, lithium, nickel, manganese, aluminum. American Manganese is focused on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. American Manganese trades on the TSX Venture, AMY, the US, AMYZF, and Frankfurt 2AM. For more information, visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Stewart Muir, Executive Director of the ResourceWorks Society. His website, resourceworks.com. You can find him on Twitter at SJMuir. Welcome back to the show, Stewart.
Thank you, Jim.
Stewart, how important are Indigenous partnerships if we're going to continue resource development in Canada? And where can people find out more about that?
Great question. There's a study out from Statistics Canada this week. It says that about 1% of Canadian business executives are Indigenous, or First Nations, or Inuit, or Métis. And that compares to 4% of the working population that is Indigenous. So it's about a quarter of the representation that it would be if there was a match to the overall population. I think you'd agree with me that this is a problem. There's an inequity here. How can it be solved? And this question is really timely because next week there's an event that is coming. It's called the Indigenous Partnerships Success Showcase, and it's bringing together almost 40 different experts in Indigenous business, partnerships, reconciliation, who are going to be discussing how do we move to fix problems like this one from the new report. And so it's pretty exciting stuff. I've been involved with it for 2 years now. I think it's one of the best things going, even though it's COVID and the event has to be virtual, not live this year. It'll be back to being a real event, in-person event, that is, next year. So that's coming. But for this year, there's some really eminent people. There's one name I think a lot of listeners will recognize, Murray Sinclair, the Honorable Murray Sinclair, retired senator now. But a few years ago, after being a judge in his career, he became the chair of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. He came out with that landmark study on Indigenous Canada with a recommendation that said, hey, corporate Canada, you really need to step up into addressing the historic inequalities that still in this day and age affect Indigenous people. And what I've been seeing is there is a trend to listen to that. In these past 6 years especially, there has been a blossoming of all kinds of different business partnerships that allow First Nations, wherever they may be, whether they're urban First Nations, you think of Squamish and they're now property developers, or Tsawwassen, they have a shopping mall, other businesses, but also most First Nations are located in rural areas, and their opportunities aren't attached to being part of a large metropolitan area. They're more in rural industries, which usually are to do with natural resources, mining, forestry, oil and gas, transportation, fishing, trapping, things like that. So the question here is to create the opportunities that so many Indigenous leaders I talk to tell me are wanted. What can corporate Canada do? And so I'm going to tell you just very quickly how people can find out more, Jim, because this event is on 2 consecutive Fridays. Just to break things up a little bit, May 28th, that's next Friday, and June 4th. And if you go to the following website, IPSS2021, IPSS2021.com, all the information's there. And it's open to anyone. First Nations people can sign up for free. So this is a really good opportunity to find out what the state of play is in 2021 on Indigenous partnerships in Canada.
Now, of course, we've seen problems in the past where people thought that their rights, their property rights as Indigenous people have been violated in construction projects, pipelines built. And it held up a lot of projects. Now are the same people saying, we don't mind the projects, please consult us though, and we'd like to be partners with it.
Yeah, I think that's the lesson of the last decade. There's been a lot of high-profile projects that have gone through public regulatory processes. In some cases, they've been very successful. In other cases, they've been abject failures. And where they failed, it's because in many cases there has been an absence of engagement, enthusiasm on the part of Indigenous rights holders who have a real say over a lot of this. And so it's sent the smart people in industry, those who want to be in this, back to the drawing board to say, all right, we need to lift our game. And that's why you're seeing an extraordinary level of Indigenous involvement, even at the project concept stage. It can't wait till after that. I mean, what's the point of deciding you're going to do something and only then going and talking to people whose traditional territories are affected? I mean, you've got to be having those conversations much earlier in the process. I think that's a major part of what I hear over and over from those who are leading First Nations or First Nations business enterprises who see the benefits of having their own source revenue that pay for all kinds of things from, healthcare and transportation for elders who live on reserve or in communities, to trades training for young people. There's so many barriers, and I know there's a sort of popular idea, First Nations get truckloads of money from Ottawa and they don't have to work or anything. Well, if you ask First Nations leaders about this, what they'll say is they are starved of money. They don't have the money that they need to deliver the services they want, and the only way to get it is to earn it by getting into business. And so that's the motivator here, in my experience.
Now, last summer, we saw railways, or not last summer, but the summer before that, we saw railways, major intersections in Vancouver and other cities shut down by protesters who said they were there on behalf of the Aboriginal people, saying shut down all this resource development. But when you went up to the actual communities affected, what did the people who live there say about these protests?
Yeah, well, a lot of them were pained, almost privately so. They didn't want to talk about it too much. They were pained that there were other people out there taking their name, their own tribal or First Nations names, and basically pretending to be that First Nation who, you can't really judge by a photo so much, but why is Toronto full of people who are claiming to speak for Wet'suwet'en? Where would they have come from? No one knows them in the Wet'suwet'en territories. Who are they to speak for members of that First Nation? I mean, that was a question a lot of people were asking, and it was agonizing for those who have been working so hard to line up opportunities with companies. They're in business partnerships. They have benefit agreements. One of the things that will be talked about at the event next week is all the different kinds of agreements, because this is what business people told us they want, and First Nations told us they want. Show us some examples. We don't want to get it from a textbook. We want to hear from people who are succeeding in having relationships. What works? What doesn't work as well? And what was working in the Wet'suwet'en area is a lot of business partnerships have been creating employment and investment opportunities, and those become the benefits that all members of the community share. So you can imagine the consternation of having their voices just usurped that way. I mean, no community is 100% anything, and it will never be that way unless you're maybe North Korea. Even North Korea can't get to 100%. They get to 99.9% in favor of their president, but never get to that 100%. It never happens. And we shouldn't be surprised when there's differing views in any community. But it doesn't mean that someone with a minority viewpoint or just one viewpoint is somehow by rights the one who's able to have their way. And so these are some of the conflicts I see recurring in all kinds of different communities on issues like this. And after is it 600 years almost since Columbus arrived in the Americas? 500, I guess. The impacts of the European era have continued to be felt. There's no quick fix to any of this, but I think one of the things is to avoid making the mistakes of the past is, get out of the way. I think allowing people to design the future they want for themselves rather than another government-imposed solution that turns out to be a disaster, that's what we need to avoid. So I think, in the spirit of getting out of the way, let's hear from people who are seeking partnerships and seeking business, because that's what we're hearing will unlock the future that so many want.
Now, this isn't Canada, but in Alaska, where during the last recession, I took a cruise with my wife to celebrate our 40th wedding anniversary, and we went to a native performance, and this gentleman and his family personally thanked us for being there, saying during these tough economic times, you had other places you could have taken your money, and we totally appreciate the fact that you came to visit us and gave our family a chance to show our culture to you and show some appreciation. But we also appreciate you coming here and supporting us. And I think a lot of Aboriginal communities across the country feel the same way. They want people to come there and perhaps find out their way of life and why it's so important and how it blends in, and they don't want resource development to take that away from them, but they also know, having lived on the land successfully for tens of thousands of years, that you can do both. You can have economic development and sustain the environment. Yeah,
well, part of that we're seeing at the conference next week, the Partnerships Conference, is a new group in the Metro Vancouver area, the Salish Sea Guardianship Group. They are advocating for bringing multiple different First Nations that are traditionally in Metro Vancouver area together to talk about how to protect, to take actions to protect the Salish Sea. I mean, there's concerns about the amount of impact over time that having a growing population on the shores of the Salish Sea, things that happen on top, on and around, under the Salish Sea, have impacts. And so what's the way to manage it using traditional values? We've never seen that before. There's lots of regulations and laws and so on that apply to what humans do around that part of the ocean that we call the Salish Sea, or the Georgia Strait. But what we're seeing now is different. First Nations are saying, no, we've got this. We can bring the degree of protection that we believe is needed in our traditions to the problem. And that's a wonderful emergence. And, it's early days. We'll learn what it means. In fact, there's one of our first discussions is the Salish Sea Guardians Group is going to be talking about their work, because last year at the first ever Indigenous Partnerships event, that same group of First Nations leaders went away and said, what can we do? Like, they put their heads together and they've come back with this collaboration that has now been launched. It's happening now in real time. It's pretty cool to see.
We'll have more with Stewart Muir right after this.
Engineer Gold Mines is focused on the exploration and development of the historic high-grade Engineer Gold Mine situated 32 kilometers southwest of Atlin, British Columbia. Engineer Gold Mines is fully permitted for surface and underground exploration, with the drill program now underway. Engineer Gold Mines Limited trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol EAU. For more information, please visit us at engineergoldmines.com.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Stewart Muir. Stewart, a lot of people are taking a look at a report from the International Energy Association, IEA, and how to achieve net zero carbon by 2050. The basic thing is it says you should shut down oil and gas exploration. How big of an impact will this report have on the energy sector?
Well, if you just take as read what is said in this report, there is going to be an enormous amount of change in the energy system in the 29 years between now and mid-century. This report from the IEA talks about net zero as something that if we just we focus on this and we do certain things, change the energy system, then we'll achieve net zero, which is where the amount of emissions created by things that we do is mitigated by things that even it out, and be it that carbon capture or other things, and also changing the types of fuels that we use so there's fewer emissions. That's what net zero is all about. And needless to say, this report has created a bit of discussion, including some skepticism. I think it's fair to say, okay, you've proposed a change to the energy system that is the energy system which created modern life. How about we ask a few questions about it? And I know there is a kind of school of thought you shouldn't question this, just go and do it. But I'm a bit of a maverick. I think the average person is actually. We do want answers, and we don't necessarily take everything at face value. So, my read of it is that although it's breathtaking in scope, in basically saying we're going to have no emissions in 29 years' time, I think if you base our knowledge of current technologies, it's very hard to see this as anything more than fantasy. I mean, there's just no grip on reality in this projection, and I think that should be a starting point for how it's analyzed. And I know there will be those who say, well, if you believe in it, it will happen. I think there's religious movements that are based on that, which is all well and good, but it's not necessarily the way to change an energy system, because you have to do the hard work of the engineering to make these things possible, and the economic work. You look at there's some interesting trends right now. I was just looking at a list of the top 20 industry construction projects in Europe right now, and 5 of them, 1/4 of them, involve battery manufacturing on a mega scale. So that's a really interesting trend. It's happened very fast. But at the same time as that, the number one project in Europe, which is in Russia, is a gas chemical plant that's costing $35 billion and dwarfs, all of the battery projects. So, we might be hearing the hype about, more battery projects are being built than any other kind of projects in Europe. That's probably the headline that some would put on a story like this. But if you look at the actual value of the infrastructure, it's still very much going into things that are familiar and material that people can say, if we build this, it will work. Whereas there are still questions, and I don't want to sound like a stick in the mud, because as we've often talked about on your show, Jim, I'm for every kind of energy. We need more of everything because the world is using more energy. And here's one of the peculiar things. There's now a movement that is saying we shouldn't go for emissions-reducing technologies, nuclear, carbon capture, and hydrogen, and for that matter, big hydro. So there's a whole, groupthink out there that says you can't have those. Well, they're the most reliable carbon reduction things you can imagine. I'll certainly concede that carbon capture as a technology has a long ways to go, but it has huge potential as well. And the school of thought I'm talking about is going to say, no, what you should do is have everything solar and wind. And, as they say in Australia, horses for courses. If you've got a place that's good for solar, build solar. You'd be dumb not to. Same for wind. But not every place is good for those things, and you have to be more open about that. And so I think a lot of the politics of this is going to be around this kind of an embracing, let's do everything, which is my view, and this sort of exclusive, narrow view of, only do what I'm advocating for. And I think that's the latter one is really the road to disaster, because we have to be looking at everything.
Well, I remember a few years ago, most of the major wind farms in Great Britain were becalmed for 2 weeks, and they were scrambling to find ways to generate electricity because none of the wind farms were windy.
Yeah, and right now, the standard response from those who are kind of basing things on a hype, the expectation that, that miracles will just happen, they will say, oh, don't worry, batteries will hold on to the electricity when the wind isn't blowing. But, right now, the biggest battery plant in the world, I think it's being built on the east coast of the U.S., it'll have 6 hours of backup when it's complete, from a massive battery installation, which is great. 6 hours can be really good. And if you're talking about, peak shaving, which is what the utility business uses to make sure that at peak times of usage, they have what they need ready to go and it doesn't break the bank. You can use batteries, you can use LNG or gas plants that just switch on when they're needed. That's great. And so batteries can be really useful, and they're already proving that. But if you're talking about backing up a whole community's energy needs or an energy system for prolonged periods, forget about it. It's just not currently feasible.
What's better for the environment, burning animal dung to cook your food or using natural gas?
That's a great question. And, if you ask say a housewife in India, what would you prefer? Would you like to cook for your family indoors in your kitchen because you don't like cooking outdoors? And it's like smoking 3 packs a day of cigarettes because you're burning dung and wood. Or would you like to have this gas bottle that you just switch on when it's time to cook? Guess what they say. I think it's certainly it's partly what are our views and opinions on it, but I think it's way more powerful to look at what's happening in areas of rising prosperity. India has had a terrible blow to its middle class under COVID, but it's a reminder of the hundreds of millions of people, billions of people who aspire to live as we do, which I can't find a moral position to say they shouldn't be able to aspire to live as I do. I don't know what that position is. I think to be honest with ourselves, we should say other humans will aspire to live healthy, prosperous lives in safe, tranquil places, and we shouldn't stop them. We should help them, maybe, by providing cleaner energy, natural gas, and renewables. I mean, all of it is going to be needed, and it's going to happen whether we like it or not. So why don't we do it the best way we can?
Now, it's interesting. We know fossil fuels will still be needed to do a number of things, like jet planes don't work well on electricity. An Air France flight, though, an Airbus 350, I believe, flew from Paris to Montreal. 16% of its fuel was bio fuel mixed in with the regular jet fuel, and Hilliard McBreth was telling me that a jet can run on about 20% of that. But do we have the resources of taking what would be land used to grow food and switch that to growing fuel?
Yeah, I think aviation will be subject to a great disruption in its fuel systems, but it's going to take longer for that to happen. When it does happen, can you imagine fuels like hydrogen being successfully used in aviation? Right now there's lots of people talking about mixing hydrogen into natural gas systems. Now, if you've ever gone to make a choice at the store for a new barbecue, you're always confronted with that question. So will this be propane or natural gas? Are you going to, hook it up to your home system, or are you going to get a bottle? And I used to wonder, well, why should it be any different? Why can't I just hook up whatever I want? Well, it's because the fuels are different and they require different kinds of burners and combustion and pressures and all that. That's why you need different equipment. So, hydrogen is a fuel that can be used to compete with or replace or supplement natural gas. There will be some technical obstacles to using it equally with natural gas, just like the barbecue thing. But over time, we'll solve those. They're very solvable issues. And once we have more hydrogen in the gas system, those who are today calling for natural gas to be ended, no more gas infrastructure, don't build pipelines or distribution networks, don't even let people put furnaces in their home that burn natural gas. The day is coming when we will realize the value of having distribution systems that are already in place that have many, many decades of life left. And those saying, oh, we should just rip those out. Well, no, that's not how the future looks to be unfolding. We're going to be able to be, dynamically changing, updating these so they can be used for a long time, because you're talking about trillions of dollars to do a replacement, and we don't even know whether the replacement is viable to provide the amount of energy we need in a reliable way.
Joseph Schachter, who's a regular guest on the show with his energy report, has pointed out even if Europe and North America lessen their use of fossil fuels over the next few years, the demand for oil and gas is booming in the secondary markets of Asia and all of Africa. So he doesn't see oil use dropping much at all in the next few years.
Yeah, and even if all light vehicle use of gasoline stopped, you would still see growth in oil over the next 15, 20 years that are a little easier to project in a relatively short term like that. After 30 years, well, who knows? But one of the things about the IEA report, the International Energy Agency, this is an organization that's known for being very tight to the agenda of OPEC, the oil producing and exporting countries, the Middle East countries that produce oil. And by an extraordinary coincidence, this OPEC supporting group thinks that the only oil produced in a few years should be oil from, wait for it, the Middle East. They don't want Canadian oil or American oil. They just want oil from one place. And that's the basis of the argument for saying that there should be no more oil and gas infrastructure or areas developed at all, because it should all be done by the Middle East. It's actually the most incredibly self-serving report like this. It's blatant when you consider how fanciful these findings are. So I think it's a play to create some political capital for the Middle Eastern oil producers that, they do have some advantages in terms of the size of the reservoir, but so does Canada. What they don't have is the ESG performance. I mean, if investors who are talking about ESG are honest, and I think they are, then ESG, or environment, society, and governance concerns, should be considered in balance. And you look at Canada, I mean, the argument for Canada being a long-term reliable producer of oil and gas is about as strong as it gets when you consider all of those factors that are held up by investment banks in London, New York, Boston, what have you. If they're honest about judging things, they'd be saying, well, we should get more of that Canadian oil into the system because that is meeting our standards. Whereas Middle East, it has some advantages on environment, it's true, in terms of just intrinsic oil qualities, but on just about everything else, it's a big fail.
Well, also, I think the oil from the Middle East isn't heavy oil, and that's what we use to make pavement, isn't it?
Well, not just pavement, but there's so many myths about heavy oil. I mean, it's true, it is, but it's also used to make refined gasoline, not other products. And I discovered that heavy oil actually has more gasoline that can be refined out of it than light oil. There's all kinds of myths about heavy oil, as if heavy must mean bad and light is good. Well, maybe that applies to, pancakes or something, but you don't want a heavy pancake, you want a light one, all right. But oil, no, heavy oil's fine. It has its uses. It has a whole bunch of refineries, not just in the U.S. where Canadian oil flows to today, but abroad as well, where they are spending multi-billion dollars on new refineries that require heavy oil. And Canada is one of the few places in the world that can provide it reliably. And one of the cool things about the oil sands, it struck me a couple of years ago, and I've been talking about it whenever I get a chance, is, it's a resource. We know where it is. We don't have to drill for it continuously. And so it's almost like having a farm approach to energy, because you have an exact measurement of where your resource is, and you can apply your investments not to always drilling for more. You apply the investment to improving your processes always. And that's why we've seen this very steep decline in the amount of energy and emissions required to produce Canadian oil from the oil sands. So that's a big story, and I think it's starting to get out there. We're starting to get out. These things are complex. There's all sorts of pluses and minuses to this, and each one should be considered. But that's one aspect of it that the Middle Eastern producers simply can't say.
Also, getting back to aircraft, now we know Harbour Air in Vancouver is experimenting with electrically powered airplanes, and they're a short-haul airline, the hop from Vancouver to Victoria, 15 minutes. Other communities along the coast, maybe 45, 60 minutes away. That's okay for a battery. For jet airliners to use hydrogen, for example, they'd have to double their fuel capacity. And I have a feeling that maybe the plane of the future, the jet plane of the future, will look like what they call the Guppy, which is the giant airplane that's shaped like the guppy fish that flies the parts for the giant Airbus 380. And maybe that's what our future airliners will also look like, so they have room to use hydrogen. Because look, when you use propane to power a car, your entire trunk is the fuel tank.
That's right. Yeah, there's a lot to be said for liquid fuels. So if you can convert gas into liquid fuel through chemical processes, or as you say, have a gigantic nose full of fuel, I don't know how that works in practice, but you're always full of creative ideas, Jim. We'll see. We'll see what happens. I think it's pretty exciting, the idea that we could have mining trucks that operate on a battery basis, bearing in mind that most mines are not located near the power grid, and they have to create their own power, which right now comes from a lot of diesel in most places. You need to have these practical considerations. But if you can pull it off, great. In forestry on Vancouver Island, they're talking about using electric trucks to move logs around, which is terrific news. I think there will be some things that advance way more quickly than we could imagine. I mean, that's happened in, say, southern USA energy markets, where suddenly it's happened like overnight. I mean, 6 months ago, no one was saying this, but now, wind power is cheaper and cheaper to install than natural gas in some places. I mean, you need to have abundant wind. You need to have a way to hook the wind up to energy infrastructure, to transmission systems. But if you can do that, then you've actually got a viable competition with natural gas. It's not going to work everywhere, and you still might need that gas for backup anyways, because as you point out, if the wind just dies for 2 weeks, well, what do you do then? I mean, you need that gas backup, and batteries currently won't cut it. So it's endlessly fascinating, this whole future of energy thing, Jim, I must say.
And Stewart, one thing that I don't hear very many people talk about is tidal power. British Columbia, because of the position of Vancouver Island, is just a prime place for tidal power, yet the only place that's using it is a fishing resort around Powell River, where they have a barge that can generate enough power for 3,000 to 5,000 homes. It cost, I think, $3 million. That's a pretty reasonable price to pay for that kind of energy. And there are tides everywhere there's an ocean.
That's right. And you go up to Seymour Narrows there. You stand beside that, you can see as it changes direction. It goes one way and then it goes the other way, and it's so powerful. I've been up in a small craft in some of those waterways between the islands at the north end of the Strait of Georgia, Salish Sea, and it's almost terrifying if you're up close. I mean, it's my life jacket on securely, because there's a vortex that I'll be sucked down 300 feet in 10 seconds if I fall in that. So the power of those waters, and if you can find a way to safely harness them, I think there are problems you have to solve with the equipment, making sure it's robust in those energetic water flows, and also resistant to corrosion from salt water, stuff like that. And if a log is shooting past at a high velocity because the tide is pushing it, are you going to be able to protect against things like that? I mean, those problems don't sound like they're insolvable or unsolvable. So if we can master that, then we've got this completely reliable, that no one ever says, oh, will the tide turn today? That's never happened.
Yeah, now some tides are bigger than others, but there's always a tide, and of course you can capture some of that water at high tide and then release it. They're doing that in Scotland. So I think the use of the thing is with BC Hydro, for example, the only thing they think about is building hydro dams. They don't have much of an imagination when it comes to generating electricity in other ways.
Yeah, well, we have a 95% plus clean energy system in BC, and it comes almost all of it from hydro. So that, you know, if you're say in the Bitcoin business, you might want to think about relocating your business from New Jersey to BC, because then you would make it a carbon neutral operation. So for those who are under pressure right now because Elon Musk doesn't want to buy your coins, come to BC and set up with some clean energy. How about that for an idea?
Sure, some quiet community along the coast with hydro. Why not? It would be their community business. We're your local cryptocurrency miners.
Exactly. Yeah. And have we got time to talk about mining?
Yeah.
Well,
Stewart,
the same report we were talking about, the International Energy Agency, they predicted that if all the things they are saying should or could happen do happen, then we will need 7 times as much critical mineral production as now. Now, that's a colossal amount of growth, and that's just in 10 years. So between now and 2030, 7 times as much copper, cobalt, manganese, and other rare earth minerals are going to be needed to support, you know, the batteries and the electric motors, all of these things. That's staggering. Right now, if you look at the size of tailings waste, there's a great infographic. A friend just sent it to me out from Visual Capital, which I love. Do you know Visual Capitalist? They have a website. They do these terrific images, drawings of mining, energy, all kinds of different topics, and they have these talented graphic artists. Anyways, they've got this picture showing if all the global tailings from mining were stacked up, it would be a cube 6 feet high, 6 kilometers high. It would be a volume of 217 cubic kilometers, and it would weigh 282 billion tons. It would cover probably half of New York City, a cube that size. And, you know, we're going to multiply that 7-fold in order to meet these clean energy targets. I mean, this is why I'm a little skeptical, because as it stands right now, I mean, there's 300 tailings ponds, I think, in the United States alone. We have all kinds of tailings ponds in Canada. I think they're, broadly speaking, very well managed, but there are some issues like acid rock drainage that continue to challenge engineers. They're always looking for new and better ways to solve these problems. But if suddenly in 10 years it's going to be 7 times bigger as a problem because we have 7 times more copper produced, wow. So those who've got solutions for environmental integrity over such a change are going to be in demand. And there's a professor at UBC, I've been tracking his work, Dr. Vikram Yadav. He's a biologist, an engineer, and has been doing some pretty incredible work in the area of tailings management, in particular acid rock drainage. So there's lots more coming in that story, and I look forward to talking about it in future.
Stewart, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Thank you, Jim.
My guest has been Stewart Muir, Executive Director of the ResourceWorks Society. His website, resourceworks.com. You can find him on Twitter at SJMuir. If you have any questions for Stewart, you can send them to info@howstreet.com. We'll ask them on your behalf. Our YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Find us on Twitter at HowStreet. We're also on Facebook. I'm Jim Goddard. Thank you for listening.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.